jump right into Paul's presentation. Paul, very nice to have you. Please go
Thank
ahead.
you so much. It's nice to be with you virtually. Can't, of course, see you in person today. Next time you can catch me in person at a conference will be the ANZAM conference in Wollongong in December. So if you're there, I look forward to bumping into some folks at that conference. But for now, I'm going to talk to you about BJM with a focus particularly on the MKE section and writing papers for that particular part of the journal. So as I say, I'm going to start with some basic facts about the journal, then go through the different types of article that we see presented within the journal, and thinking then about how you might refine your work ready for submission, whether it's for a regular article or particularly for the MKE section and the specific requirements and properties or characteristics of those articles that we're looking for. Also, a brief aside about getting involved as part of the process of writing for the journal, and I will leave a fair amount of time for questions and hopefully answers. I'm sure I can get questions. Whether I get you answers, we'll see. Okay, so about the basic standing of the journal, it's a highly rated four journal on the CABS ranking, ABDC ranking A, impact factor 4.5. Impact factors have moved around a lot over the last few years. As you know, the Clarivate methodology is settled, but BJM this year went up in its relative position in the ranking. So although the impact factor goes down, its relative position is up and it remains a Q1 journal. And the attention to the journal has been increasing year on year. Also, I'd say in terms of number of submissions, when I started a year and a half ago, we were getting about 900 submissions per year. This year, we will have about 1,500. So it's getting a lot of attention and growth at the moment. And it has a very good team backing up the work that we do for the journal. So myself, I still got my old address there, Warwick. I should have changed that slide. Oops. I should say St Andrews. Shuang Ren at Queen's in Belfast, and Rika Sarla at UNC Greensboro in USA. 17 associate editors covering a range of thematic topics and interests and global areas. I haven't listed all of them because it takes a lot of time to go through them, but you can find them on the website. A really great team, and often positioning your work for the right associate editor is important. Of course, for the special issue, you know who the editorial team is. You get their full details in the call. There's also an associate editor handling communications for us. That's the social media and other things like that. And a large editorial board covering 26 countries. But your person you most likely meet first of all will be Emma Misson, who's the managing editor who handles the submission system, the kind of the clockwork that makes the journal tick. What is our mission? It's generally for research and scholarship in any management-related theme or topic. Whereas the Academy of Management, let's say, has several journals split into different kinds of fields or niches or specialities, the British Academy of Management has one journal that largely encompasses all of the field. So it's a very general journal. So anything that you are likely to be interested in our field is likely to find a slot if you can connect with the appropriate conversation. So that could be something traditional discipline, let's say marketing or accounting or management or org studies, or it could be something more multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary in terms of the focus you're taking. So a very broad, all-encompassing journal. And so the general original articles within that framework we see are these three types. Empirical articles, they're the most common ones. So, qualitative or quantitative research on any area within the journal's aims and scope. Conceptual articles, again, these address any area within the journal's aims and scope, but to distinguish ourselves from our sister journal, which is a reviews journal, conceptual articles in BJM must develop propositions and a model. So that's the kind of conceptual work we're looking for. And also methodology corner articles. These are creative and innovative developments in methodology that can make a difference to the way we conduct our research in practice, but they're founded in your experience of developing that method in perhaps a typical case that you've used it for. So that's the general kind of positioning of the journal. What about this specific types of paper in the relatively new management knowledge and education section? This is a new section that we're growing and developing with a lot of attention and interests, and the article types there are subtly different and also have some overlaps. So the first of which is management theory articles. Now these are articles that look a lot like the general articles in BJM at the front end. So it's developing a contribution to disciplinary debates, but the educational implications come from that. So let's say you're developing something about leadership theory that makes a theoretical contribution to that debate, but it has a strong implication for how we should teach it. Maybe let's say you've discovered something about embodiment and leadership learning, which means we need to teach teach leadership in a more physically enabled way. For example, education theory articles are probably the ones you're most familiar with if you've looked at other journals in the management, education, and the management learning space. They're empirically informed articles on pedagogy or other ways of looking at adult education or education theory based on research in particular management education context. So it must be either in the formal context of a program, let's say within a business school or executive education, or something that's deliberately about management education and learning in the context of an organization. So it's an education-focused context of some description. It must also have clear theoretical and practical contributions. So you're making some kind of addition to theory debates in relation to the education theories that you're working with, but also a practical contribution to how we should teach these things differently in the future. And the final type is called management educator articles. These are our essay type, and these make speculative contributions to theory, either a disciplinary or education focused bent, but the idea being they must be personally relevant to the author as a management educator. So it must relate to you in your circumstance as a professional in our academic lives in business schools and management schools and so on. So that's the quick run through the various article types. Let me say a bit more about the way in which we position MKE articles in the field. So you will be familiar with some of the existing journals in the field already: Academy of Management Learning Education, Management Learning, the Journal of Management Education. They have specific missions. We overlap with some of those, and we work together collaboratively to grow the field. So you won't hear me saying, don't send anything to them, send it all to us. We work together to help you find the best conversation for your work. So for example, if you had a very practically oriented piece of education scholarship, let's say really about a new exercise that you find works well in the classroom, you should send that to the Journal of Management Education, because that's what they publish, and that's where you'll find your conversation. So don't worry if sometimes when you engage with any of the journals in this field, we say, actually, that's a great article, but it fits over there with this other journal. We work collaboratively. It's not dismissing your work, it's finding the right conversation. So we're trying to help you connect with that conversation, find the best place for your work to be read and cited. So as I've said, the reason for that is because we have some overlaps with these other journals that we continue to collaborate with, but the two distinctive ones we have that differentiate us from the other journal I've touched on briefly, I'm going to talk about in a little more depth just now. The first of those is the management theory articles. These are the empirical articles that focus on disciplinary developments, but they have educational implications, like that example of a leadership theory article that impacts on how we teach leadership, for example. So your primary contribution will be in the area of disciplinary theory. So here's an example from a Write et al. Paper that I cite a bit later in this presentation. Our study extends the literatures on institutional logics and risk by providing insights into the role of multiple logics in the social construction of risk. So that's a clear disciplinary contribution, but it also has practical contributions in terms of education. So contributes to the management education literature by focusing attention on the risks of physical harm in the classroom teaching, and by theorizing when, how, and why educators apprehend these risks as ordinary or extraordinary. So you can see the way in which there's a very clear disciplinary contribution, and it has direct relevance to what we do in the classroom as well on practical terms. That's the kind of balance we look for in that specific article type. The essays as well are different, making speculative contributions to disciplinary education theory, must also be clearly personally relevant to the author. That's important. So we're looking here not for an autoethnographic empirical article, but some way in which it's clear that your motivation to be engaged with this is clearly related to the topic. So there'll be a speculative contribution to disciplinary educational theory from that. So what needs to be seen differently or should be changed in theory debates, and a persuasive argument about why this is the case. This is not demonstrating or building theory. It's making an argument that theory might be seen differently. This is a very subtle nuance, and you'll get lots of editorial feedback when you're polishing that. But it really is making a persuasive argument rather than convincing us completely that the case is closed. It's taking the conversation on in a speculative way, pushing beyond the limits of current conversation. And personally relevant. So we need to see this has relevance for you in your context and relates without being empirical to your experience as a management scholar. That might be in general terms or in your work as an educator. Now, what that means is you're probably either in the opening of the paper make some positioning statements about a motivation or an experience that triggered your focus on this, or you might use a few examples scattered through the essay. But like with any other essay, if you use empirical examples, they should illustrate points of argument, not be the source of them. It's a subtle nuance again. So empirical material either is motivating for the actual reason you've got into this study, or it's used to illustrate and underline a point of argument rather than developing a point of argument. Are the distinctions. So here are the two example articles you can find online as I point to at the moment. There's more articles coming through, but they're still in the pipeline just now. So I'll just point to these ones. In terms of management theory articles, April and colleagues' article is a very, very good example. Management educator essay from Dirk and Peter is another great one too. Their personal motivation was really just anger about the way in which ChatGPT is being adopted thoughtlessly and the risks inherent in that. So hopefully that communicates. So they should give you the idea of those two papers. And again, on the second type, the essay, there should be some emotional heat in it. If you're angry or upset, it's fine to see that, but then you make your reasoned argument following from that. So those are the different types of MK papers. The focus there on the ones that are different. The other one, the educational theory, is very familiar to anybody working in the education space, and the other journals will offer you lots of templates and examples for those. So what do we look for in the contributions from these articles? If you're looking at the general articles for BJM or the management theory or education theory types, all of which are empirical, then we want novel contributions and convincing data. So that means that you can use any methodology that's appropriate for getting to the bottom of the questions you're asking and just implement it to the highest current standards. We're completely agnostic. So we don't favor qualitative or quantitative. It can be from autoethnography through to structured equation modeling. As long as you do it well to the highest current standard, that's all we ask. So the word length is usually between 6,000 and an absolute max of 8,000, but that's exclusive of tables, figures, and references. We're changing the guidance on that now. Nobody sticks to 6,000 anymore and sees the 8,000 as the realistic limit. So realistically, your limit for an empirical article in MKE section or in any other section of the journal is 8,000 words, but it's an absolute limit, but it does exclude any tables, figures, and references. So it actually gives you quite a lot of space and scope, especially if you use tables creatively. Okay, so that's the kind of empirical types. And essay types, we want this clear speculative theoretical contribution and new research questions. So you're trying to push debate on here, open up questions, push things along a bit rather than just add an incremental change to current theory. Must be personally relevant research. I've said already, you need to have some kind of hot motivation going into this, some reason why you were fired up to take on this question, or show through some illustrative examples that you have grounding of this in personal experience. For the essays, there's a limit of 6,000 words exclusive. That means excluding any tables, any figures, any references, but no exceptions. An essay has a shorter limit because it has no methodology, obviously, and it shouldn't have any data either. So you should be able to make a tight argument in a shorter length of article. And also, that's because essays of all things should be articles you want to read completely. It's perfectly reasonable to use a large empirical article for some insights from it that you draw, but an essay is trying to persuade somebody, trying to convince them, to show them something different. So you want it to be something that people want to read, and a shorter, tighter argument generally is better for that. Submission process is via the normal route that you've used for just about everything else that you publish via ScholarOne. There's our link illustrated just there. So I mentioned the manuscripts when I started with 900 last year, they went up to 1,100. It'll be about 1,500 this year. The acceptance rate and desk reject rates, I've got stars and abouts on them for very good reasons. It's difficult to track the acceptance rate as it goes from year to year with such a fast moving growth in the journal's output. And the desk reject rate looks alarming, but a lot of it is really stuff that's completely out of scope, hasn't read the journal at all. So things like medical science, we still get submitted. I don't know why, perhaps because BMJ is just one letter combination from BJM and people get confused. And so maybe that happens. But a lot of desk reject material is really stuff that is just not in the field, or it hasn't paid attention to the particular requirements we've asked. So I think if you look at the requirements we ask for and think about them carefully, your chance is much higher. An acceptance rate about 10% is reasonable after that. Submissions come from all around the world, every continent. The majority are from Europe and Asia at the moment, but we're growing in other regions. What should you do with your article before you submit it to make sure that you stand a good chance? So what are the desk reject reasons to watch out for? The fit with the field of the journal is not clear or central to the manuscript. And one way in which you make it very obvious to us that you do fit is if there is recent work in the journal that relates to your theme, you cite it. You want to show that you're joining the conversation. It's not about making you cite the journal for impact readers, making sure that you know what we're writing here and you've joined the conversation. Now, with MKE articles, there won't be a lot to draw on and connect with. So instead, we'll look for good connections to kind of the sister journals like AMLE, Management Learning, or JME as appropriate. But if you're doing disciplinary theory work, you might find connections in BJM. So make sure you make a connection if it's there. The submission might be an inadmissible type. We get a lot of these that are just plain review articles. We don't take reviews. There's a sister journal at BAM for that kind of submission. Or we have some basic concern about the quality of the work that's presented to us. Something's wrong with the literature. Maybe it's all out of date. Maybe the methodology isn't to the highest current standards, or the discussion isn't developing an argument towards theory. Often that's the one that needs most work in initial submissions, but the findings are clear and there's an empirical contribution. People haven't pushed on what that means for theoretical debate. So it's making sure you ask yourself about that is important. Or it might be too derivative or incremental or lacks originality. That's both in terms of automated checks. People do sometimes submit work, sadly, that is plagiarized or draws too much on their own prior work. Or they're just making an incremental contribution because they haven't kept up with the current literature. So again, making sure you know where the literature is important to framing your contribution in a powerful and persuasive way. And the last one is very rare, but does happen. The finish of the material is not what we expect. Submission's been made too soon, or people don't understand the norms for the journal, indeed for journal writing. We do get some student papers sent in, for example, that obviously don't understand the craft of journal writing. All of this can be helped by really having discussions with peers before you submit. So in terms of developing your work for submission, I'd say work on the fit with the field and the specific article type. Think about the methods, make sure you understand how the methods you are using are presented in your particular target journal, BJM in this case, and make sure you have the rigor and robustness being quite obvious. Make sure the contribution to theory is clear, as is your contribution to practice or policy, and you've thought about the hygiene or format issues. Let's look at those in a little more detail, step by step, and then I'll finish talking, much to Oliver's relief. So first of all, in terms of fit, think about how and why readers of the journal will see your work as relevant to them. So you need to cite relevant work in the journal, so you connect into the conversation, understand how we talk about things around here, or AMLE, MLJME for MKE articles, because we haven't got a kind of a critical mass of our own work in that field yet. So make sure you know what the distinctive article types look like as well. I've given you quite a range there. So look for recent examples in the journal to make sure you know that your journal has, that your article has the same kind of shape and concentration and expresses things in a similar way. For methods, pay attention to the guidance for authors on the website and any specialist editorial guides. You will find there's some editorial guidance in BJM around methods and so on. But the most important thing perhaps is to benchmark against recent similar papers. If somebody's working on a similar area of theory to you with a similar kind of methodology, does your work look like theirs and display rigor and robustness in similar ways? It's fine if it doesn't, but you need to know why. If you don't know why, it should look similar. Bearing in mind, of course, every reviewer knows something about methodologies. They're always bound to make some comment about it. Contribution. Most journals, including BJM, require a theoretical contribution of some kind, and that can vary across the different article types, especially the provocative and speculative contribution we'd look for in MKE essays, for example. But in general, we want to make some way, demonstrate how you're making some change to the theoretical conversation. You're leaving the conversation different than when you joined it. And any practical contributions are derived from the consequences of the theoretical contribution. They come by way of that. Because you've made this addition to theory, this has these practical implications. That kind of logic flows. Hygiene. Make sure the finish is what the journal expects. We do have clear standards about what we ask you to do. And so if you think through those carefully and get peer feedback, because we all make mistakes in our final write-ups for journals, it's worthwhile checking that you have everything really lined up tidily. As a friend of mine, a fellow editor somewhere else says, no journal can or should be the first reviewer of your work. If you're sending it into a journal and nobody else has looked at it, that's almost likely a message for disaster. So make sure somebody checks through it for you. And although some of these things can feel very minor, like formatting conventions, grammatical errors, editors don't actually care. We're looking for exciting work. Honestly, we want to develop exciting work. Your best work, we want to help you get it published. But reviewers are very angry if they have to read through sloppy work, because like you, they're all doing this voluntarily. If they have to read through shabby text for 4 hours, they end up very angry and their contributions are quite negative in response. So keep them happy. It pays. If you want to connect with us, think about pre-submission and get your friendly reviews first. Look out for focus paper development workshops with other journals in the field quite often, and this one here, for example. And we welcome and encourage reviewers, a good way of learning about the journal.